to spread the pilot cost and the airplane costs and the landing costs and all those things I mentioned among more and more people. And so the average cost of sending someone to New York drops, in this case, from $3,000 to $200. Notice it stays there for a while, and then it rises once they go to 10,000 seats. And why might that be? Well, they probably run out of landing rights at LaGuardia. I mean, where would you land 10,000 people a day, more than the system now holds? Well, now if we put these two charts together, we can see how Big Air would make the most amount of money. That's usually its job. We say that firms are trying to maximize profits. Again, we imagine the firm as a rational player that has a goal, and in this case, its goal is to make as much money as possible. Well, look at the example. When it charges $50 and those 10,000 people fly, Big Air loses money. It spends $3 million, but we saw that it takes in revenue of only $50 a seat times 10,000 seats is $500,000. It loses $2.5 million. Big Air never wants to do that. What about $300 a seat? Well, that's pretty good for Big Air. As you can see, it yields a $200,000 profit. Big Air can even do better if it charges $500 a seat. Even though it only costs Big Air $200 to fly the person, we can see that here is where it maximizes its profits, hauling in $300,000 in net profit. Think about Big Air's price structure there. It was able to supply the seat for $200, and yet it figured out that it should charge $500. From Big Air's point of view, if it tries to drop the price from $500 to $300, in a way you might think, well, how could that be a bad thing? They're going to take in 1,000 more customers who are willing to pay $300 a seat for the privilege of flying, when it only costs Big Air $200 a seat to supply the airplane seats. So, of course, you'd think Big Air would make more money by lowering the price to $300. Indeed, any price it can charge above $200, it can make money. Cost me $200 to make the seat, I charge you $212, I chalk up another $12 in profit. But Big Air in this example is a monopolist. Big Air is the only one flying, and so Big Air sees and says to itself, well, wait a minute. If we drop the price from $500 to $300 in order to capture those extra people, we're giving up charging $500 to the first 1,000 people we flew. And it's not worth losing $200,000 from those more intense, desired, inframarginal customers, if you will, in order to make $100,000 from the new 1,000 people who will pay $300 a seat when it costs $200 a seat to fly them. So Big Air instead chooses, no, we will restrict output, we say, and fly at $500 a seat, selling just 1,000 seats rather than 2,000 seats. From a social point of view, think about it from the outside, or even from the government's point of view, or the citizenry point of view. This is really a shame. After all, the cost of the resources of flying somebody to New York is apparently $200. And there are people out there willing to spend more than $200. Think of it as a resource ecology thing. The cost of the resources on Earth are such that for $200, you could fly another person from point A to point B. And there's somebody out there willing to spend $300 for it. That person has an intense preference compared to the actual cost of doing it. But we deny them the flight. We say, no, because I'm a monopolist and I can make more money at $500, I don't want to sell it to you at $300. Economists call this a deadweight loss. They say, boy, that's a shame. There should be somebody, there is somebody willing to supply the seat at a tad over $200, even $300 in our example, and there's somebody who wants to pay $300 for it, and yet we're not matching them up. Now, you've already seen that if this was a competition, if there were 10 airlines out there flying, of course, another airline, like my cookie maker, would jump right in there and say, oh, come here, we'll fly you to New York. Give us $300, we can fly you for $200. It's a great deal. But again, because Big Air is a monopolist, it's the only one flying this route, and the demand structure, the prices are as we've seen, Big Air will choose to restrict output to sell only 1,000 seats at $500 a seat. Now, in the real world, they can have it both ways. If you fly on an airline and you talk to the person next to you, you might find that they've paid much more than you paid for your seat, or much less than you've paid for your seat. Big Air does not quite have to charge everybody the same for its chocolate chip cookie, if you will. There is an ability for it to control arbitrage. Now, in this case, it does it by saying, your ticket is non-refundable and non-transferable. You can't sell it back to us and just buy another ticket when the prices drop. And similarly, you can't just go to the airport and trade it with other people. And they do this maybe hiding behind a false claim about security or identification or something. I mean, it's not entirely obvious why we let them do that. But for the time being, they can do that. And this allows them to discriminate in a way, that's not meant as a terribly bad word here, it's a word economists use, to differentiate among customers. They are able to take the people who want to pay a lot of money and charge them a little bit more, and take the people who want to pay closer to $200 and charge them less. So in real life, Big Air discriminates among customers. You've probably also figured out by now that that decreases rather than increases the deadweight loss. After all, it makes it more likely that Big Air is selling seats that it can make for $200 to people who are willing to pay more than $200 for them. Because it's already sold seats to the $500 people, and then it's able to lower the price without people conducting arbitrage and trading the seats. So price discrimination by a monopolist allows it to make more money, also decreases the deadweight loss, though it might get us a little nervous for other reasons. After all, the monopolist is now going to make much, much more money, and there might be people who don't like that, or we might worry that the monopolist is setting markets up on purpose in order to price discriminate. Notice that the monopolist doesn't necessarily get to keep all this money. The more clever the monopolist, the more clever the government. I guess a good government could take this money away if it wanted to. A government might say, well, to the extent that we are giving you the monopoly, after all, we're the one that's deciding how many planes can land in LaGuardia. Instead of selling all those landing rights to Big Air, the government could have set things up so that Big Air would have competed with American Airlines, United Airlines, and so forth. So if the government gives or allows Big Air this monopoly, the government might say, well, we want to tax away a good deal of that money or price it away in order to use the money for public works or to build LaGuardia or to expand the runway or what have you. Well, it's easy to see how the government does that. The government might auction off the landing rights. The government might say, well, we're willing to sell the right to fly 10 planes a day to LaGuardia. Let's see how much you all will pay for it. So when you see a monopoly price discriminate, don't immediately think that the monopoly is making all that money. There might be somebody, and especially the government, that's able to extract a good deal of that profit through an auction or a taxing scheme. The reason I put the example that way is I wanted to introduce the idea that for monopoly to thrive, it needs to have a way of preventing competitors from entering the market. Sometimes we say that monopolies thrive where there are barriers to entry. It has to be something that keeps the competitors out. In the cookie case, nothing kept out new bakeries. And so as soon as the price of cookies started rising, more people entered the market and started producing those wonderful chocolate chip cookies.